Hello everyone and welcome to the Game Engine programming series where I write a game engine from scratch. We have got ourselves a great game editor that has a fantastic feature, and that is our log system, where I can see all the log messages from anywhere that we issue them. Except that that is not so true because the last video was getting way too long and I had to stop halfway through the implementation of the log system. That's because I try to keep these videos shorter than an hour because my aim is to have a bite-sized amount of information in there for people to play with during their free time. Because I assume that if you're following along with me with this series, then you're going to try different things yourself in your free time. And of course, watching these videos will take your time, and then I assume you're going to play with the code and improve things the way you think it's better. I hope at least that you do that, and let me know if you have something in the code that you think it's implemented in a better way than I do. And yeah, I would like to hear from you about that as well, because I love to learn new things too. And what better way could I wish for than from the viewers of my videos? So that's why I had to stop last time. Fortunately, today is another day that I can continue working on this engine. Well, there isn't much of an engine yet. So far, I have been only working on the editor side. After today, I hope to start writing the first lines of code finally for our beloved Primal engine. So today, I would like to finish this logging real quick. There is not much left to do. I just have to add a couple of buttons to filter the messages, and that's it basically. And then I'll start constructing the multiselection structure for the game entities and the components. I'll not use it yet, but at least then we will have something that we can build upon after I spend a couple of episodes working on the engine itself. So that's the plan for today. Let's get coding. Okay, first let me close all of these files except the one that I'm working on for now. And this is the view model for our logger. Actually, I don't have to do anything with this anymore. I just need to make a couple of buttons in the viewer, and that's all I have to do for now. So first of all, I want to put the list of the messages in a scroll viewer so we can scroll through them. And then I would like to format our messages in a way that gives us more information. I would like to display the time of the message and give it a color depending on whether it is a warning or an information or an error message. I made a little style for the doc panel, which contains the message and the time of the message and other information, so that whenever the user goes over each message with a mouse, then the background of that particular message will change to green. So now I changed the background to gray because, of course, for the message types that are information, I'll have the text color of the time label to be light green, and that would be invisible with a light green background, of course. So now I have a gray background, and the text of the time label will be light green whenever the message is an information. Okay, now this way we have 3 colors for our 3 types of messages, and just the message itself next to the time. I'm going to try and test this by just adding some messages to the logger and see what happens. So now every time this control is loaded, then we'll have 3 messages added to the message log. There you go. I have this gray background, and if I hover with the mouse over a message, I'll see this extra information that the message is from the logger XAML.cs from the constructor line 29, and we'll see the time, and in the color I see what type of message it is. Now, the next thing I want to do is to add 4 buttons to clear the list of messages and to select the 3 types of messages that there are to filter them. For that, I'm going to add a border here. Here I have 4 buttons, and the top one is to clear. That's the easy one. I can just add it here, that whenever the user clicks this button, the logger should clear all its messages. For the other ones, I'm going to have just one event handler, and then depending on which one is checked, we can filter these messages. So here, remember that we had this message type flags that we can logically OR together. And we have a message filter that we can set using this set message filter. And the only thing we have to do to construct a new filter is to check which one of these buttons was checked and then construct a message filter from that. Okay, now I have a filter here that with none of its bits set. And depending on which button is checked, I set the bit for that particular type of message. And so if all of these 3 buttons are checked, then we set all the bits, and otherwise the ones that are checked. Now we have a couple of messages of each type of log messages, and I can select which ones I don't want to see here, because if you select info type, then it will display the information messages as well. I made an error here in the name. Let me see. Okay. So now I deselected warnings and errors, and all I see is the information messages, and now I can see information and error messages, or warning and errors, or just warning, so it works. And when I click on clear, then they all go away. That is fantastic. And now we are done with the log control. I will make these buttons look differently later on with our beauty pass of the editor, when I'm going to define the color themes and what everything should look like. For now, it's just the default buttons and colors and stuff, and it will change, and then I'll just go through everything and redesign them as well. But for now, it will do the job. And now we are ready to start and work on the multi-selection game entity and components. And what I mean by that is, if we go back to the editor again and select these entities. For example, if I would like to change the names of 2 or more entities, then I could select 2 or more of them and then change the name. But now, as you can see, it only changed the first one that I had selected and not the others. And that is because we can only handle 1 game entity at a time. And we don't have anything for, well, multiple selections. The same holds for anything that I would like to do for the components. If I would like to change the position of the game entity, then right now I could just change that for one of the entities that I selected. And I would like to make something that would allow me to do changes for multiple selected entities. Of course, that's a rather useful feature to have in the editor, and yeah, it's a bit of a work to do, but yeah, I'm going to do that. So first, I would like to show you what I have in mind for implementing these multi-selection entities and multi-selection components. So right now we have these classes, game entities, and I intend this game entity to be the base class for other kinds of entities as well, like lights and cameras. But each entity, regardless of its type, has one or more components. The one component that every entity has, and it's like mandatory to have, is a transform, and then we can add scripts, geometry, rigid body, etc. kind of components to it. And what I want to have for multiple selections is that I have an analogous type of entity, and that's a multi-selection entity. And it has its types of multi-selection components. For each type of component that we have, we also have a multi-selection component version of it. And likewise, this multi-select game entity can act as the base class for other types of multi-select entities. So we can have multi-select light entities and multi-select cameras. Of course, we don't have to save any of this to our project because, well, it's just used by the editor, so we can handle multiple selections. So regarding saving and serialization, they are simple. We don't have to do anything. What we do have to do is keep track of which entities they refer to. So, for example, the multi-selection game entity will have a list of game entities that we selected, and each of those have their components, of course. So when we change any property of the multi-select game entity, it will spread those changes to all the selected entities. So the multi-select game entity has the same properties, of course, as the game entity. For example, a name and a Boolean value of if it is enabled or not. So whenever we change the name of this instance, it will distribute this change to all the selected entities. The same happens for the components. Each multi-select component refers to each of these components of the selected entities. So, for example, the multi-select transform refers to all the transform components, and each property that we set or change in multi-select transform is propagated to all the selected transform component. So all we have to do now is for each kind of entity and component have the analogous multi-selected multi-selection version of it. And that's what I want to start working on today. I will start with the multi-selection game entity. And for that, I'll have an abstract base class that the multi-selection game entity will inherit from. Okay, so this is the base class or the base abstract class. The game entity itself inherits from it. And now all I have to do is to have the same properties as the game entity has. So I'll have two properties that are isEnabled and name. And of course, I'll have a list of components as well. So as you might have noticed, I'm using a nullable type here instead of regular Boolean. And that's because whenever I gather the values of isEnabled for these selected entities, remember we have a collection of selected entities, they might have different values for isEnabled. So some of them could be isEnabled is true and the others isEnabled is false. And whenever we have mixed values, so they are not uniformly the same, then I'll use null for this parameter to indicate that this value is not the same for all the game entities. So in all our multiselect component and entities, we will have nullable types for that reason. So now I have the name here, which didn't need to be nullable because string is a reference type, which is nullable of itself. And I have added a list of components. To explain what I mean by this, I'm going to add this interface and the base class for components. So in components, this component class should also be abstract. We shouldn't be able to create an instance of this class, of course, because it's a base class. It doesn't say what kind of component it is. And now I'm going to add an interface. And this one is just empty for now. And the reason that I'm using an interface, an empty interface, is that the base class that I'm going to use for the components is a generic class. So here I have a multiselection component, and that has a generic type of the component that we are making it for. So for example, if we have a multiselection transform component, we will have this T to be of type a transform component. So the multiselection types and the types of components are tied together in this way. So if I had not have this interface, then I wouldn't be able to have the generic list of components like I have here, because, well, obviously I can't do this, because then I have to give the type of this component for which component type it's made. So that's why I use an empty interface. I hope I explained it well enough for it not to be a puzzle. So here in the component, I'll do the same basically as I did for game entities later on. But for now, I'm going back to game entities and finish this one up. Well, like I said before, these multiselection types have a list of selected entities. And like I did in here, let me see, why is this? These classes don't need to be public. Okay, so in the constructor, which is called whenever we have a new selection, here in the project layout, in the list of game entities, whenever we reselect or change any selection, then one of these multiselect game entities is going to be constructed. So whenever that happens, I want to, of course, have a list of these entities. Here I assert that entities list of entities is not null or empty. Okay, now I want to have something that would update all these entities whenever one of these properties changed. So I can use property changed event for that, of course. Now I have a method that is called to update the properties of the selected entities for whatever property has changed. So now I have to implement that one. So I made this method virtual because there are going to be more kinds of entities that inherit from game entity, and they'll have their own properties and the method that updates those properties that we don't know about right now. So that's why this method is virtual. So now for each of my two properties that I have here, I have these selected entities and I iterate through them. And for each of these entities, I update the value of their corresponding property. And whenever this happens, that means that the property that was changed is handled here, is updated here. So the inheriting or the descendants of this class don't have to do anything, and that's why I return true. And whenever I return false, that means that there wasn't here in the base class anything for me to handle. So the descendants of this class should look for their properties and see whenever this property name is the same as their properties, then they can handle that one. And of course, I need to first gather from all these selected entities their value of properties so I can display them. So like I said, if they have uniform values, so if they are all enabled, then this is enabled is true, or if they are all disabled, then this is enabled is false. But if some of them are enabled and some of them are disabled, then this value will be null to indicate that there are different values. And the same holds for name as well. So for that, I'll have a public method that the inheriting classes like this game entity can call to gather the information whenever they are constructed. And this function just reads all the selected entities and their properties and puts these values in our properties. So again, because we have inheriting classes, this function will be protected virtual. These methods go through all the selected entities and use this function to get the property that we want to have. Here I'll make three functions for the three most common types that we have. Those are float values, Boolean values, and strings. And we can just make them static so everybody can use these functions to determine if we have uniform values or not. And if we have uniform values, we will get the value that the selected entities all have. So here I'll get the value or get the property that we want to have for the first entity. And if that's the only selected entity, then basically we are done and we have a value to return. But if we have more entities that are selected, we compare the property value for all the other entities with the first one. And if we find one that is different, then we have a non-uniform value, so we return null. And if we can find any other entity that has a different value, then we have uniform value and we can return this value. Another thing that I think I need for this float is a comparison, because of machine imprecision, we can't really use this kind of comparison, even if the values are equal. To avoid those kind of imprecision problems, I'm going to have a little mathematics utility to help us with that. Okay, here I have written two extension methods to compare floating point values. And I have a really small number here. And here what I say is, whenever the difference between these two values is smaller than this small number, then they are equal. And going back to our get value methods, this should now be is the same as. And of course, if it is not the case, so if these values are not the same, then we return null because we have different values. The one for the Boolean is the same. Unfortunately, for Booleans, we don't need this this method, so we can compare them directly. And again, we can have one for strings as well. We return just one value, so this shouldn't be mixed values, but mixed value. Now we have a little problem, because whenever we are gathering this information from the selected entities, we are setting our properties, which will change the value of our properties, and it will call this method, which then again spreads this change to the selected entities that we have here. So I'll put these methods together so we can compare them. So if we call this, it will change our properties in the multiselection entity, which in turn will call this method that would spread these changes to our selected entities. And if we have like a null value here, it will be propagated to them as well, which is not good. So we have to disable this update whenever we are gathering values. And that's all we have to do to fix this problem. So here I'll have a Boolean, private Boolean, that would enable or disable updates. So here, whenever we are refreshing, I'll just disable these updates by setting enable updates to false. And when we are done, I re-enable them again. And here I can just check if updates are enabled. And if so, I update the selected entities. Now I have to have a constructor for multiselect game entity. And here I can call this refresh to fetch all the data that I need from the selected entities. And then we are kind of done for the properties of the game entities. So now we can go here in project layout and have this SelectionChanged method so that it will create a multi-selection entity for us whenever we change the selection. So it should happen here. I'll move this down. So this undo redo selection code is together. So here I have a game entity, a multiselect game entity. And if I have anything in this new selection, then I'll make a new multiselect game entity. And of course, we don't need this line anymore, because if we don't have anything selected, then this MS game entity will be null, and we'll be setting data context to null, which does the same thing as having that other line there. So this should do the job. I'll just change all these public classes to internal. We don't need public classes. Now I selected one entity here, and we see its name. And if I select 2, then I can see that they're all enabled. And well, of course, we have the same name for all entities, so I can try and change one of them. So this one changed, and now if I select this one and 2 others, then there is like different values, so we don't see anything here because we have a null string. Now I can change the name of all these 3 game entities to something else. And they changed to supervillain. That's good. And the same holds for this enable. Yeah, of course, this doesn't work yet because I'm still using these commands for changing names and enabling game entities, which don't work. As you can see here, we have these error messages that they can't find rename command and is enabled command. These are used here in the project layout view. Let's see here. No, in the game entity view, actually. So we have here rename command and is enable command. Well, this one does work because although we don't have the rename command, we still bind directly to the name as well. And well, it changed the name of the entities. But as you can see here in the history, they are not undoable anymore. So I can't revert to the original name of the entities. So that's something we have to change for multiple selections, and do the same for enabled too. And this checkbox doesn't work because we are not binding in a two-way mode. So even if isChecked is changed, the property value of isEnabled will not change. So that's something I'll have to fix. To fix that, I need to go back to GameEntity class. And unfortunately, for the multi-selection entities, I can't use this rename command and isEnable command. So I need to get rid of these here. I can't use them anymore. The reason is, of course, that if I would use this command to rename each selected entity, then we would have multiple undo items, undo actions for each selected entity that changed. So, for example, if I would select 10 entities and change their name in one go, then we would have 10 undo actions. And then I'll have to press Ctrl-Z 10 times to change all of them back. And that's, of course, not ideal. So I can't reuse this. The thing that I can do is change back this multi-select game entity name, and it will propagate the changes to the selected entities. So delete this. And the commands. And here I will not be using the command anymore. So what I will do is to move the handling of the generation of undo redo actions to the code behind and handle them here. So this is a bit less straightforward than just using commands. I need to determine whenever this name has changed. And I don't want to update the names of the entities while typing. I want to change them whenever I hit enter. So I'll change this update source trigger to explicit. That means that whenever I hit enter, the source of this text will change, will be updated. And I can determine whenever that happens by checking when the text box lost focus. So whenever the text box gains keyboard focus, that means that the user will probably change the name. So we need to remember what the names of the selected entities are when the text box gains focus. And we need to generate a redo whenever the text box loses focus. So here, whenever the text box got focus, then I'll need to generate an undo action. So my undo action will be just to remember what the names are of all the selected entities. So I just go through all the selected entities and remember the names. So here we see why I moved all of this back to the code behind as well, because we also have to refresh the multiselect entity of this view. But each time we have another selection, there will be another multiselect entity. So we will have to get it from the data context of the game entity view. Now, what I do here is to get a data context that is set for this control and then select the entity and its name before we change it. So this text box has just got the keyboard focus and we are just about to type something new. And then I remember the entities that are selected and their names in this list of selections. And our undo action will just be that we go through this list that we remembered and restore their old names, because the old names are still in that list. And then we refresh the multi-selected game entity that we currently have to fetch back those old names again. And then I have to do the same again for the redo action. And whenever we lose focus, that means the user either hit enter to accept the changes or press escape to discard the changes. So I need to know whether this property also really changed. And to determine if that was the case, I'm going to write a lambda expression that can help us with that. Here I need to remember two things: the property name that was changed and our undo action. So here the undo action will be also a field. Okay, here whenever the data context of this control changes, then I'll just get the name of the property that was changed. And then here I can check if that was the name of the game entities. Okay, here I do the same thing again. I remember all the selected entities and their new name, because after we lost focus and after that we have changed the name, because our changed property name is name. So we know that the user hit enter and not escape. Otherwise, this property name would be null. And we have an undo action. So we know that the name was changed, and now we can remember all the selected entities and their new name. And with our redo action, we can go through all these entities and set their name property. Now we can add this undo redo action to our undo redo list and set property name and undo action to null. Looking at these two functions, we can see that they are very similar. I think I can factor out in a method so we can call it instead of duplicating this code. I'll just have these lines copied to a private method. And now instead of setting undo action directly, I just return this new action. And here I can just call that method. And then I can do the same here as well for redo action. Okay, so let's check if it works. Now I can select 3 entities and change their names. And now I can see that I have a new item in the history, rename game entity. I can change another one to superhero. And now I can go back and undo. And go back and undo. And of course, I can hopefully redo as well. Yeah, so that's great. We are almost done. The only thing I have to do for today is to do the same undoable thing for enabled checkmark as well. And that one is simpler because I can just go here and check if this checkbox was clicked on. And then I can do the same as I did for the rename. I can create a method that gets the isEnabled action instead of the names. Okay, here I have the same method to get the action that would remember the state of isEnabled property for all the selected entities. And it's basically the same as the get rename action, but then we remember isEnabled instead of name. And here, because we don't have, like in the case of name, we could just hit escape to cancel our action or hit enter to accept it. We can't do that with the checkbox. The checkbox is either checked or not checked. So we can just go ahead and do everything in here in one go. So I make an undo action, remember the old state of all the entities, and then go ahead and set these values. And then I remember the new values, and so I have my undo and redo actions. One more thing that I have to do is what I remembered that I removed here. That shouldn't have been removed. It's that I want it to still be one way because I update this property in code behind. This is just to visualize what is the state of this property. Now I can see that all my game entities are enabled. So if I select the top 3 of them and then I can disable them, and I can see here that the new history item has been added to the undo list. And now if I would select the bottom 3 ones, then I can see that this enabled checkbox is indeterminate because this one is disabled and the other ones are enabled. So that works okay. And now I can go and undo my actions. Hopefully it works. Yeah, and then I can redo them as well. And that's good. That's all I wanted to do for today. So we are done. One last thing that I saw while skimming through this logger was that I can have a small improvement here by do this as a read-only. Always make the code better. So yeah, this was again another fruitful episode of the Game Engine series. I hope you enjoyed watching it. Oh, I had to remove this as well. Never mind. Let's carry on and remove this. Okay, as I was saying, this was another great episode of the Game Engine programming series. I hope you enjoyed watching and I hope you learned something new. And I hope, of course, that you will be back for the next episode, because then I'll be starting to code the game engine for the first time. So that will be interesting and thrilling, for me at least. And yeah, until then, thank you for watching and see you around. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please feel free to like and subscribe. If you join me on Patreon, you'll get access to the code on GitHub, so you don't have to type everything over from the video. Plus, there are also other nice goodies and rewards exclusive to my Patreon supporters. Please use the link in the video description to check them out. I hope to see you next time. Until then, take care and happy game engineering!